The mud tasted like copper and diesel fuel. Tessa Kane lay face down in it, her left leg twisted beneath a pile of concrete rubble that hadn't existed 10 seconds ago. The world was ringing. Not the high-pitched whine of tinnitus, but something deeper. A bass note that vibrated in her chest and made her teeth ache. She tried to move. Her left leg screamed in protest. Through the fabric of her combat uniform, she could feel wetness spreading. Warm, sticky, not mud, blood. The sky above was the wrong color. Smoke turned the morning sun into something amber and sick. Somewhere to her right, automatic weapons fire chattered in 3-round bursts. Professional, controlled. Not panicked spray and pray. That meant trained hostiles. That meant her team was in serious trouble. Boots pounded toward her position. Heavy, running. She tried to lift her head and the world tilted sideways. Her vision narrowed to a tunnel, then expanded again. Shock trying to pull her under. Tessa, don't move. Garrett Hayes dropped to his knees beside her. The SEAL medic's hands were already moving, checking for arterial bleeds, assessing damage, with the systematic efficiency of someone who'd done this 100 times before. His face was smudged with cordite residue. His eyes were wide. Stay still, he said. You're losing blood fast. Tessa's fingers dug into the mud. She forced her breathing to slow. In through the nose. 4 counts. Hold. 7 counts. Out through the mouth. 8 counts. The technique her father had taught her when she was 13 years old. The technique that kept her hands steady when everything else was chaos. Garrett's knife sliced through the fabric of her left pant leg. He sucked in a breath. She didn't need to look to know it was bad. The way his hands hesitated for half a second told her everything. Shrapnel, he muttered. Deep, multiple fragments. Gonna need a tourniquet. Garrett, her voice cut through his assessment. Quiet, but absolute. He looked at her face. Suppressive fire dropped on the left flank, she said. Each word cost her. Her ribs felt like they were full of broken glass. They're repositioning an RPG. You have 8 seconds. Garrett blinked. What, 7 seconds? He stared at her like she'd started speaking a foreign language. Around them, the gunfire continued its brutal percussion. Men were shouting. Radio static crackled with desperate calls for backup. The world was ending in slow motion. Tessa, you're in shock. You can't possibly... The rocket-propelled grenade hit the wall 40 meters to their left. The explosion turned morning into thunder. Chunks of concrete the size of fists rained down around them. One piece struck Garrett's helmet hard enough to snap his head sideways. He froze, his hands still gripping the tourniquet he'd been about to apply to her leg. Tessa's eyes hadn't moved. She was tracking something he couldn't see. Reading a battlefield that existed in dimensions most people never learned to perceive. Secondary shooter, she said. Her voice was quieter now, thinner, blood loss pulling at the edges of her consciousness. Ridgeline, 11 o'clock, 400 meters. He's targeting Lawson. Garrett's hands had stopped working entirely. He was staring at her with an expression that would have been funny under different circumstances. Shock, awe, and something else. Fear. Not fear of the enemy. Fear of the woman lying bleeding in front of him. Fear of what she represented. Of what she knew. Of capabilities that shouldn't exist in someone wearing an equipment coordinator's insignia. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. Have you been combat trained? The question hung in the air between them, heavy, weighted with implications neither of them had time to unpack. Tessa's eyes met his. Behind the pain, behind the blood loss, behind the shock of the blast, there was something else, something old, something forged in places that didn't appear on any official record. The answer was in those eyes before she ever spoke, but she never got the chance to speak it. Another explosion. Closer this time, the world turned white, and then everything went black. 72 hours earlier, the helicopter's rotors beat the air over Camp Lejeune like a mechanical heart. Steady, relentless, turning humid North Carolina morning into a whirlwind of noise and displaced oxygen. Tessa Kane stood in the cargo bay, one hand on the overhead strap, watching the landing zone grow larger through the open door. She was small, 5'4" on a good day, 120 pounds if she'd eaten breakfast. The kind of frame that made people assume things. Usually the wrong things. She wore standard Army ACS. No unit patches that screamed anything important. No badges that demanded respect. Just a name tape that said Kane, and a rank insignia that said Staff Sergeant, and a job description that said absolutely nothing about who she really was. The helicopter touched down. Dust exploded outward in a perfect circle. Tessa grabbed her single olive drab rucksack and stepped out into the prop wash. The noise was immediate. overwhelming. The kind of sound that lived in your chest and made conversation impossible. She kept her head down and moved toward the SEAL staging area on the far side of the compound. Nobody was there to meet her. That was fine. She hadn't expected a welcome committee. The briefing room was exactly what she'd anticipated. Concrete block walls painted the same beige that existed on every military base in America. Folding tables arranged in a U-shape. A projector screen at the front showing a mission overview that probably hadn't changed since yesterday's brief. 14 SEALs in various states of attention, some sitting, some standing, all of them radiating that particular brand of confidence that came from knowing you were among the most dangerous humans on the planet. And then there was Tessa. She chose a seat against the back wall, pulled out a clipboard, said nothing. Commander Hollis was reading from her dossier. 49 years old. Texas accent that 30 years of service hadn't quite erased. The kind of officer who'd earned his position through blood and competence, rather than politics and connections. Staff Sergeant Tessa Kane, he said, not looking up from the folder. Equipment Coordination Specialist, Administrative Support. Here for, let's see, Logistics Integration and Communications Handoff Protocols. He said it like he was reading a phone book. Bored, obligatory. One of the SEALs made a sound. Not quite a laugh, not quite a song, somewhere in between. Anyone else tired of babysitting desk jockeys? Brennan, 33 years old, broad shoulders, Pennsylvanian accent, the kind of face that suggested he'd been the starting linebacker in high school and had never quite gotten over the glory days. A few chuckles rippled through the room. Tessa didn't react. She kept her eyes on her clipboard, taking notes about nothing in particular, letting the words slide off like rain on treated canvas. Commander Hollis shot Brennan a look. The chuckling stopped. She's here because someone in Norfolk thinks we need better equipment transition protocols, Hollis said. His tone suggested he agreed with Brennan, but had too much professionalism to say so. She stays out of the way. We do our job. Everyone goes home happy. Clear. A chorus of yes, sir, filled the room. Tessa wrote something on her clipboard. It looked like notes. It was actually a sketch of the room's exit points and blind spots. Old habits, the kind that saved lives when buildings started exploding around you. The briefing lasted another 30 minutes. Joint training exercise. Army Rangers and SEAL team coordinating urban warfare tactics. 5 days of controlled scenarios building up to a final evaluation on Saturday. Standard stuff, nothing complicated. Tessa absorbed it all without asking a single question. When the briefing ended, the SEALs filed out. Most of them didn't look at her. A few did. The looks ranged from curious to dismissive to something that might have been pity. Garrett Hayes stopped near her chair. The medic, 36 years old, Montana accent so faint you'd miss it if you weren't listening. Eyes that assessed and cataloged and filed away information without seeming to try. You need help finding your bunk, he asked. It was a genuine offer, not condescending, just professional courtesy to someone who was new and unfamiliar with the layout. I'll manage, Tessa said. Thank you, Corpsman Hayes. His eyebrows went up slightly. You know ranks. I read the roster. Most admin support doesn't bother. Tessa offered a small smile, polite, professional, revealing nothing. I like to be prepared. Garrett studied her for another moment, then nodded and left. Tessa waited until the room was empty. Then she stood and walked to the window. Outside, the SEALs were gathering near the armory, checking weapons, running gear checks, the familiar ritual of warriors preparing for controlled violence. Her right hand drifted to her left forearm. Traced the outline of a scar there. Small, precise. The kind that came from surgery rather than accidents. Old memories tried to surface. She pushed them down. This was supposed to be simple. 6 days. Keep her head down, file some paperwork, collect a paycheck. Move on to the next temporary assignment in a career built entirely on temporary assignments. Nothing complicated, nothing dangerous, nothing that required her to be anything more than exactly what her dossier claimed she was. She almost believed it herself. Day 1 became day 2, became day 3. The dismissal was never hostile, just pervasive. Background noise that accumulated like dust in corners nobody bothered to clean. During gear issue, Brennan held up an M4 carbine. You know which end the bullets come out of. Tessa glanced at the weapon. Her fingers twitched. Muscle memory that was older than her enlistment papers trying to execute a functions check without her permission. She caught herself, nodded instead. Safety's on the left, she said quietly. Good girl. The words were meant to be dismissive, patronizing. But Brennan's tone wasn't cruel, just casual. The way you'd talk to someone you didn't consider a threat or a colleague, someone who existed in a different category entirely. During PT formation, Thatcher waved her off. 43 years old, Oregon accent. The quiet one who watched everything and said nothing. You can sit this out, he said, not unkind. We don't want you getting hurt. Tessa sat, but she watched. And while she watched, her eyes cataloged the way they moved, the spacing they maintained, the hand signals they used, the way certain people naturally gravitated toward leadership roles while others hung back in support positions. She'd seen it all before. In other units, other lifetimes. In the chow hall, she ate alone. The SEALs clustered at a table on the far side of the room. Their conversation was loud, punctuated with laughter and the kind of profane camaraderie that came from shared danger and absolute trust. Tessa ate her meal in silence. Chicken that was too dry, rice that was too sticky, vegetables that had been steamed into submission somewhere around the previous Tuesday. She didn't mind the solitude. She'd learned a long time ago that being underestimated was a gift. People showed you who they really were when they thought you didn't matter. That evening, walking back to her bunk, she overheard Brennan talking to Lawson, 25 years old, the youngest member of the team. Virginia accent, still had that fresh-faced enthusiasm that combat and time would eventually sand away. Dead weight, Brennan was saying. I get that Norfolk wants better logistics integration or whatever bureaucratic bullshit they're selling this week, but hauling an admin specialist through combat training hopes she stays out of the way. Lawson's response was too quiet to hear. Tessa kept walking, her face revealed nothing, but her hands hidden in her pockets were clenched into fists. Old anger, old frustration, old wounds that had never quite healed. She'd been here before. Different names, different face. Same fundamental dismissal. The invisible woman, the afterthought, the person you forget was even in the room. Back in her bunk, she unpacked her rucksack with methodical precision. Most of it was exactly what you'd expect. Uniforms, toiletries, a laptop for filing reports, a tablet loaded with logistics software that she'd probably never actually use. But at the bottom, wrapped in a weatherproof bag, were other things. A medical kit that was far too advanced for someone who wasn't a corpsman, combat gauze, hemostatic agents, chest seals, a needle decompression kit, surgical instruments that belonged in an emergency room rather than a duffel bag. And beneath that wrapped separately a small wooden box. She didn't open it, didn't need to. She knew what was inside. Her father's dog tags, a letter written in handwriting she'd memorized years ago, a single scope ring from a rifle that was locked in storage 3 states away, reminders of promises made, and promises she'd kept for 8 years, until someone made her break them. Day 3 was when things changed. Morning started at 5:30 with PT that Tessa still wasn't invited to join. Oh, she might go on. She used the time to review equipment manifests that didn't need reviewing. Busy work, the kind that justified her presence without requiring her to actually interact with anyone. By 0900, the temperature had climbed to 98 degrees, humidity thick enough to chew. The kind of weather that turned human beings into malfunctioning organic machinery. The training exercise was live fire urban movements, room clearing, hostage scenarios, standard special operations stuff conducted in a mock village built specifically for this kind of work. Tessa was supposed to observe from the command center. Climate-controlled, air-conditioned, safe. But someone had screwed up the scheduling. The command center was packed with brass from Norfolk conducting their own evaluation. No room for an admin specialist who wasn't officially part of the training cadre. So Tessa found herself outside, in the heat, watching from the perimeter as the SEALs moved through their paces. They were good, better than good. The kind of professional competence that looked easy but required thousands of hours of repetition to achieve. Moving through fatal funnels like water, communicating with hand signals and micro movements that needed no words. This was what excellence looked like when it had been refined to its purest form. Lawson was running point on the second building. Young, enthusiastic, pushing a little too hard because he had something to prove. Tessa saw it happening before it happened. The way he moved. Too fast, not hydrating enough between runs. Sweat pouring off him like he'd been dunked in a river. Heat exhaustion, maybe heat stroke. She stood, started walking toward the safety officer. But before she could reach him, Lawson dropped. Just collapsed, mid-stride, like someone had cut his strings. The training stopped immediately. Garrett was moving before Lawson hit the ground. The medic's training overriding everything else. He reached the fallen SEAL in seconds, began his assessment with practiced efficiency. Heat exhaustion, Garrett called out. Getting him cooled down. Need water and shade. Tessa was 30 feet away. She should have stayed back. Should have let the professionals handle it. Should have remained exactly what everyone thought she was. But her eyes were seeing things Garrett hadn't noticed yet. The way Lawson's trachea was shifting. Subtle. Almost imperceptible. But there. The absence of breath sounds on his left side that had nothing to do with heat and everything to do with pressure building in places pressure shouldn't be. The color of his lips. Cyanotic. Oxygen-starved. This wasn't heat exhaustion. This was trauma. This was dying. Tessa moved, not running, not drawing attention, just closing the distance with quiet purpose. Excuse me. Corman Hayes, Garrett looked up, irritated at the interruption. He had a patient, he had a protocol. He didn't need admin support second-guessing his medical assessment. I've got this, he said, polite but firm. His trachea is deviating right, Tessa said. Her voice was quiet, clinical. The tone of someone reading data rather than making suggestions. Breath sounds absent left side. Garrett's hand stopped moving. What? That's not heat stroke, Tessa said. She was closer now, kneeling on Lawson's other side. Her hands weren't touching the patient, weren't interfering, just positioned, ready. That's tension pneumothorax. You have maybe 2 minutes before cardiac arrest. The words hung in the air like smoke. Garrett stared at her, then at Lawson, then back at her. His hands moved to Lawson's chest, checking, assessing, running through diagnostics he'd somehow missed in his initial evaluation. His face went pale. Jesus Christ, you're right. He was already reaching for his kit, pulling out equipment, but his hands were shaking slightly. This was serious. This was life-threatening. This was the kind of emergency that could kill someone in minutes if you didn't act perfectly. Fifth intercostal space, Tessa said. Not taking over, not pushing, just there, present. Mid-axillary line, 14-gauge needle. Garrett's hand steadied, following her instructions without question, without thought, operating on pure instinct and trust that surprised them both. The needle went in, air hissed out. Lawson's color started improving immediately. The crisis passed as quickly as it had arrived. Garrett sat back on his heels. His hands were still trembling, the adrenaline dump catching up with him now that the emergency was over. He looked at Tessa, really looked at her for the first time since she'd arrived. Where did you learn advanced trauma care? Tessa stood, brushed dust off her uniform. Her face was composed, professional, revealing nothing. I read a lot, she said. It was a non-answer. They both knew it. Garrett opened his mouth, closed it, too many questions and no time to ask them. Lawson needed transport to the aid station, proper evaluation, real medical care beyond battlefield expedient measures. But as they loaded Lawson onto a stretcher, Garrett kept glancing at Tessa, at her hands, at the scars she didn't bother to hide anymore, at the way she'd moved, confident, certain, like she'd performed needle decompressions 100 times before in situations where hesitation meant death. Commander Hollis appeared at Garrett's elbow. Status, tension, pneumothorax, Garrett said. Caught it early, he'll be fine. Good work. Wasn't me, sir. Garrett nodded toward Tessa. She spotted it, talked me through the procedure. Hollis turned to look at Tessa. His expression was unreadable. Calculating, reassessing. You're trained in combat medicine. Some first aid, sir, Tessa said. Deflecting, minimizing. Enough to recognize the symptoms. That was more than some first aid, Staff Sergeant. Tessa said nothing. Hollis studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. Good catch. He walked away, but Tessa felt eyes on her back. Thatcher, the quiet observer, standing in the shade of a building, watching, cataloging, filing away information about the admin specialist who somehow knew more about combat trauma than she should. The invisible woman had just become visible, and that was dangerous in ways most people would never understand. Day 4 brought its own complications. Commander Hollis was inspecting equipment near the armory when a piece of sheet metal with an improperly secured edge caught his palm. Clean slice. Deep. The kind that bled immediately and profusely. Garrett was on the other side of the compound. Minutes away, Hollis swore, grabbed the wound, applied pressure, standard first aid, control the bleeding, stay calm. Help was coming. Tessa was walking past, clipboard in hand, looking like she was heading somewhere important to file something meaningless. She saw the blood, saw the way Hollis was holding his hand, saw the color draining from his face just slightly as the shock of injury hit his system. She diverted course without thinking. "Sir, let me see." Hollis looked at her, surprised, then annoyed. "I've got it." "With respect, sir, you don't." She was already pulling medical supplies from the bag she always carried. The bag that was far too comprehensive for someone who wasn't a corpsman. Combat gauze, pressure bandages, hemostatic agents, tools that belonged in emergency rooms and field hospitals, not in an admin specialist day pack. Hollis hesitated, then extended his hand. The cut was worse than it looked. Deeper. The edges weren't clean. And the location right over the radial artery analog meant this could go from bad to catastrophic fast if clots didn't form properly. Tessa's hands moved with absolute confidence. Direct pressure, elevation, gauze application with exactly the right amount of tension. "Radial artery analog," she said quietly. "Clinical, like she was reading from a textbook. 8 minutes pressure minimum. Don't release early or the clot disrupts. Keep it elevated above heart level. No movement." Hollis was staring at her hands, at the way they moved. Practiced, professional, perfect. "You sound like a corpsman." "Just standard first aid training, sir." "That's not standard anything, Staff Sergeant." Tessa didn't respond. She was timing the compression in her head. 8 minutes. The magic number for most arterial bleeds. Not enough and you risked rebleed. Too much and you risked tissue damage from excessive pressure. She'd learned these lessons in places she couldn't talk about from instructors whose names she'd never speak. When she finally released pressure and checked the wound, the bleeding had stopped completely. Clean clot, good color, no complications. She wrapped it in proper bandaging, applied an additional layer of protection, gave Hollis instructions about changing the dressing and warning signs to watch for. He listened, and while he listened, he watched her face. "Where did you really learn that? Books, sir." "Nobody learns that from books." Tessa packed up her medical supplies. "With respect, sir, plenty of people do." She walked away before he could ask more questions, but the damage was done. Word spread, quiet at first, just observations shared between teammates during downtime. "Did you hear about Lawson? Admin girl saved his life." "Bullshit." "No bullshit. Garrett said she spotted the pneumothorax before he did." And then she patched up Hollis. "What the hell kind of admin specialist carries combat gauze?" The questions accumulated like water behind a dam, and Tessa felt the pressure building. Day 5. Friday night. The final training evolution before Saturday's big evaluation. Nighttime patrol through forested terrain. OP for opposing force role players hidden in the darkness. The objective was simple: move through the training area without getting ambushed. Tessa was told to tag along. Observe. Stay out of the way. She walked at the rear of the formation, silent, invisible again, just the way she preferred. The team moved well. Professional spacing, quiet communication. All the fundamentals executed properly. But Tessa's eyes were seeing things they weren't. Thermal signatures breaking the natural cooling patterns of the forest floor. Boot prints pressed into soft earth at angles that didn't match patrol paths. Broken branches positioned too deliberately to be accidental. Op 4 was 60 meters ahead, hidden behind a fallen oak. 3 of them, waiting for the SEAL team to walk into the kill zone. Tessa's mouth opened before her brain caught up. "Contact right, 45 meters, 3 hostiles behind fallen oak." The words were quiet, but in the silence of the night forest they carried. Everyone stopped. Brennan turned to look at her. How could you possibly see? The Op for role players jumped up from behind the fallen oak, exactly where she'd said. Weapons raised, blanks firing in the darkness. The training scenario ended immediately. Objectives failed, ambush successful. Commander Hollis called everyone back to the rally point. He stood in front of Tessa, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "Lucky guess, Staff Sergeant." "No, sir." "Then how?" Tessa hesitated, then pointed to the ground. Thermal signature broke natural cooling pattern. Boot prints angled wrong for the patrol path we'd expect them to take. Branches positioned too deliberately. You could see all that in the dark. Once you know what to look for, sir, it's hard not to see it. Silence, then Thatcher spoke from the shadows. "Where did you serve before this assignment?" Tessa looked at him. The quiet observer who'd been watching her since day one, the one who asked questions nobody else thought to ask. "Navy Master Chief, 2 years. Doing what?" "Corpsman work." "Where? Various locations?" "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I have, Master Chief." More silence. Baroma. Garrett stepped forward. "Her file has gaps. I checked. 2 years active service. Honorable discharge. Before that, he shrugged. Nothing official. Brennan laughed. No humor in it. So we've got an admin specialist who can spot pneumothorax patch arterial bleeds and read terrain like she's been doing it her whole life. And nobody thinks that's weird. I think it's weird, Hollis said quietly. I think it's very weird. He turned to face Tessa directly. I'm going to ask you a direct question, Staff Sergeant, and I want a direct answer. Have you received combat training beyond what's standard for Navy corpsmen? Tessa held his gaze. She could lie. Should lie, keep the cover intact, stay invisible. But something in Hollis's eyes told her the lie wouldn't work anymore. Personal background, sir. Not official. What does that mean? It means someone taught me things that aren't in any training manual. Who, before Tessa could answer, the radio crackled. Emergency frequency. Real alert. Not a drill. All units. Armed intruders at ammunition depot. Shots fired. Multiple casualties reported. This is not an exercise. Repeat, this is not an exercise. The training area transformed into chaos. SEALs running for vehicles. Gear getting snatched up. The smooth transition from training to real-world emergency happening in seconds. Hollis was barking orders. Mount up, full loadout. We're 3 minutes out. Tessa stood in the darkness, watching them prepare to go to war. Garrett sprinted past, then stopped. Came back. You should stay here. This is real. This is dangerous. Tessa nodded. Understood. But she didn't move toward safety. She moved toward the armory. Inside, weapons were being distributed. Ammunition, tactical gear, the SEALs grabbing equipment with practiced efficiency. Tessa walked past them all. To the back wall, where the precision rifles were stored, she lifted down an M24. 24 pounds of wood and steel and purpose. The weight was familiar in her hands, like greeting an old friend she'd been avoiding for 8 years. When she turned around, the entire team was staring at her. Commander Hollis stepped forward. What are you doing, Staff Sergeant? Tessa's hands were already performing a functions check. Magazine, bolt, scope. The movements were automatic. Muscle memory that predated her paperwork. Lawson's pinned by a sniper, she said. Her voice was different now, not quiet, not deferential, absolute. Grid November 7-4. No angle for suppressive fire. How do you know that? Radio chatter, sir. I've been listening. Hollis stared at her, at the rifle in her hands, at the way she held it, not like someone who'd read about rifles, but someone who'd lived with them. That's an 850-meter shot, he said slowly. In darkness. Yes, sir. Administrative specialists don't make shots like that. Tessa's eyes met his, behind the quiet exterior, behind the professional demeanor, behind 8 years of paperwork and pretending. Something else looked back, something old, something forged in fire and maintained through discipline and hidden behind lies that were about to collapse completely. I can make the shot, Commander. The words hung in the air between them. Brennan laughed, nervous, disbelieving. You can't be serious. But Tessa wasn't looking at Brennan, she was looking at Hollis, and Hollis was looking back, doing the math in his head, weighing risks, assessing probabilities, making the kind of decision that commanders made when there were no good options, only necessary ones. His jaw tightened. Take position. The rooftop was concrete and gravel, cold despite the lingering heat of the day. Tessa dropped into prone position, bipod legs deploying with practiced efficiency. The M24 rifle settled into her shoulder like it had never left. 850 meters, in darkness, with a man's life hanging in the balance. She'd made harder shots, years ago, lifetimes ago, in places that didn't officially exist with targets that were never confirmed. But this was different. This was the first time in 8 years she'd allowed herself to be the weapon her father had forged her into. Her right eye found the scope. The world contracted to a circle of green-tinted darkness. Night vision turning shadows into geometry. Distance into numbers. Lives into calculations. Lawson was pinned behind a concrete barrier. Even through the scope, she could see the dark stains spreading across his shoulder. Arterial bleed. Bad one. He had maybe 10 minutes before shock took him. Maybe less. The hostile sniper was elevated. Second floor window. Smart position. Good sight lines. Professional setup. Tessa's breathing slowed automatically. The technique so deeply embedded it required no conscious thought. In through the nose. 4 counts. Hold. 7 counts. Out through the mouth. 8 counts. Her father's voice echoed from 1,000 training sessions. Breathing controls everything, Tess. Heart rate, muscle tension, the microscopic tremors that turn a perfect shot into a miss. Master your breath, master yourself. She'd been 16 when she finally understood what he meant. She was 29 now, and the lesson had never left. Her finger found the trigger, not pulling, not squeezing, just resting there, feeling the weight, the resistance, the precise amount of pressure required to send copper and lead downrange at 2,800 feet per second. Wind. She could feel it on her face, smell the direction, taste the moisture content that would affect bullet trajectory in microscopic ways that most shooters never learn to calculate. 3 miles per hour, left to right, quartering angle, elevation compensation. Coriolis effect at this distance was negligible but not zero. Temperature differential between shooter position and target area. The math happened automatically. Subconscious processing built on thousands of hours of repetition. She made her adjustments and fired. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. Familiar violence. Controlled chaos. The muzzle flash was bright even through the suppressor. The sound was a flat crack that echoed off concrete and disappeared into darkness. Downrange, the hostile sniper jerked, but didn't fall. Tessa's second eye opened, both eyes tracking now, reading the impact point through scope and naked vision simultaneously. High and right, 6 inches. The wind had shifted in the half-second between her final calculation and trigger press. Atmospheric conditions changing faster than human perception could track. A miss. Her first shot in 8 years and she'd missed. The thought should have triggered panic. Doubt. The cascade of second-guessing that destroyed shooters under pressure. But her father had trained that weakness out of her before she'd turned 17. You'll miss, he'd told her on a hot August afternoon when she'd been 15 and furious after her 5th consecutive failure at 600 meters. Everyone misses. The difference between good shooters and great ones isn't that great ones never miss. It's that they adjust and make the second shot count. Garrett's voice crackled through the radio. Negative impact. Repeat negative impact. Tessa was already adjusting. Wind compensation, elevation. The hostile had moved after the first shot. Repositioning to a slightly different angle. Smart, professional, trained. Her breathing cycled again. Not the full technique this time. Just the exhale. The moment between heartbeats when the body was most stable. She fired. The hostile sniper dropped. No drama, no Hollywood spin, just immediate transition from vertical to horizontal, from threat to past tense. Target down, Garrett's voice, disbelief making it rough. How the hell? Get Lawson out, Hollis interrupted. Move now while we have the window. Tessa stayed in position, scanning for additional threats, covering the extraction with the same professional detachment she'd brought to every operation she'd never officially been part of. Her hands were shaking now, delayed reaction, adrenaline dump. The body's natural response to extreme stress finally catching up with conscious decision-making. She'd killed a man, first time in 8 years, first time since she'd promised her mother she was done with this life. The rifle felt heavier than it should, like it was made of guilt instead of steel. Below, the SEAL team moved. Lawson extracted, secured, bleeding controlled. Crisis transitioning from immediate to manageable. Tessa safed her weapon, stood. Her legs were unsteady. Not from fear, from the simple mechanical reality that she'd been holding absolutely still for 3 minutes while every muscle in her body screamed for movement. She walked back to the ladder without being told. By the time she reached ground level, the entire team was staring at her. Not with dismissal anymore. Not with casual disregard. With something else entirely. Fear and respect mixed together into an emotion that had no easy name. Brennan opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again like a fish trying to breathe air. What the hell just happened? Nobody answered him. Commander Hollis stepped forward. His face was unreadable in the tactical lighting, but his eyes were doing calculations, reassessing everything he thought he knew about the quiet woman with the clipboard and the administrative job description. Get Lawson to the aid station, he said. His voice was command. Absolute. Everyone else, my office now. He looked at Tessa. Especially you, Staff Sergeant. The walk back to the command building was silent, except for boots on gravel. Tessa felt the distance between herself and the team collapse and expand simultaneously. Closer because she'd proven herself. Further because they had no idea what she actually was. And she wasn't sure she knew anymore either. Commander Hollis's office was small, functional, a desk that had seen better decades. Chairs that weren't quite comfortable. Maps on the walls showing terrain and targets and the endless geography of controlled violence. Hollis closed the door, pointed to a chair. Tessa sat. The silence stretched. Hollis wasn't looking at her. He was looking at a file folder on his desk. Standard military personnel jacket, the kind that should have contained everything important about a service member's background and qualifications. Except hers was thin, suspiciously thin. Administrative coordinators, Hollis said slowly, don't make 850-meter shots in darkness. Want to start explaining. Tessa sat straight, hands in her lap, professional posture. Personal background, sir. Not official. That's not an explanation. It's the only one I can give, sir. Hollis's jaw tightened. He opened the folder, started reading. Staff Sergeant Tessa Kane, enlisted Navy 2015. Trained as hospital corpsman. Graduated top of class. Served 2 years. Honorable discharge 2017. Since then, various administrative positions. Equipment coordination. Logistics liaison. Supply chain management. He looked up. Nothing in here about advanced marksmanship. No, sir. Nothing about combat training. No, sir. So where did you learn? Tessa said nothing. The door opened. Thatcher entered without knocking. The quiet observer. The one who asked questions nobody else thought to ask. He was holding a tablet. On the screen was a photograph. Old. Archived. The kind of image that lived in digital graveyards until someone went looking for it. A girl, 17 years old, red-brown hair pulled back in a ponytail, holding a trophy that was almost as big as her torso, smiling with the unself-conscious joy of someone who'd just accomplished something extraordinary. Next to her, a man in marine dress blues, broad shoulders, weathered face, gunnery sergeant rank visible on his sleeve. The kind of bearing that came from decades of service in places that broke lesser men. Thatcher turned the tablet to face Hollis. Found this in an archived news article from 2013. Junior National Marksmanship Championship. Category winner long-range precision rifle. He zoomed in on the caption. Tessa Kane, age 17, first place. Pictured with Father Gunnery, Sergeant Marcus Kane, United States Marine Corps Force Reconnaissance. The air in the room changed. Hollis looked at the photo, then at Tessa, then back at the photo. Force Recon. Yes, sir, Tessa said quietly. Your father. Yes, sir. He taught you to shoot. Yes, sir, from the time I was 12 until I turned 20. Hollis leaned back in his chair. The leather creaked. Force Recon snipers are among the most elite marksmen in the world. If he trained you to championship level at 17? He let the sentence hang. Garrett spoke from the doorway. Tessa hadn't heard him enter. I pulled her service record, the official one. There are gaps, before she enlisted, and during her service. Sections that are redacted, classified at levels I don't have clearance for. Meaning what? Brennan demanded. Meaning, Garrett said slowly, that Staff Sergeant Kane's official history doesn't match her actual capabilities. The question is why. All eyes turned to Tessa. She sat perfectly still. The moment she'd been avoiding for 8 years had finally arrived. The collapse of cover, the revelation of truths that couldn't be unsaid. But Hollis surprised her. I don't care what you were, he said. His voice was quieter now, almost gentle. I care what you can do, right now, today, with lives on the line. He stood, walked to the window, looked out at the night that was slowly surrendering to dawn. We're going to the range at 0800. You're going to demonstrate that tonight wasn't luck. If you can repeat it under controlled conditions, we'll talk about what comes next. If you can't, he shrugged. Then we all forget this happened and you go back to filing paperwork. Tessa nodded. Yes, sir. Dismissed. Get some sleep. You're going to need it. She stood, walked to the door, almost made it out. Staff Sergeant. She turned. Hollis was still looking out the window. Your father. Is he still alive? The question hit harder than the rifle's recoil. No, sir. He passed 3 years ago, cancer. I'm sorry. Thank you, sir. Do you think he'd be proud of what you did tonight? Tessa thought about that, about the promise she'd made to her mother, about the 8 years she'd spent running from the person her father had shaped her into, about the guilt and grief and anger that had driven every decision since the day they'd lowered him into North Carolina clay. I don't know, sir. Hollis finally turned to look at her. His expression was softer now, understanding in a way that suggested he'd made his own impossible choices over the years. I think he would be. Back in her bunk sleep was impossible. Tessa lay on the narrow cot, staring at the ceiling. Outside the base was quiet, the kind of 0300 silence that existed between midnight, chaos, and dawn preparation. Her shoulder ached where the rifle had bruised it. Recoil trauma. She'd forgotten how much the M24 punished you, how it demanded perfect form, or paid you back in purple welts and stiff muscles. She'd made the shot, Missed the first one, made the second, saved Lawson's life, killed a man, broken her promise, become the thing she swore she'd never be again. Her hand found the wooden box in her rucksack without conscious decision. The box she'd carried through 8 years of temporary assignments in administrative positions. The box she opened maybe twice a year when the grief became too heavy to carry alone. She lifted it into her lap. The wood was worn smooth, cherry. Her father had made it himself in the garage workshop he'd built after his last deployment, the one that had broken something inside him that never quite healed. The lid opened with a soft creak. Dog tags, worn metal, her father's name stamped in all caps. Kane Marcus J. Blood type, O positive, no religious preference, social security number. The complete reduction of a human life to identification data. Beneath them, photographs she hadn't looked at in months. Her father in desert camouflage, younger, before the wars and the deployments and the exposure to burn pits that would eventually kill him. Smiling with the easy confidence of someone who hadn't yet learned what violence actually cost. Another photo, her at 16, first competition win, standing next to him, both holding rifles, both smiling. Before she understood that the skills he was teaching her would define and complicate every choice she'd make for the rest of her life. And beneath the photographs, a letter, sealed in plastic to protect it from moisture and time, written in handwriting that was as familiar as her own pulse. She'd read it once, at the funeral when her mother wasn't looking. Standing in the bathroom at the funeral home while everyone else gathered around the casket and told stories she only half believed. She'd never read it again, because reading it meant confronting truths she wasn't ready to face, meant choosing between the promise she'd made to her mother and the person her father had believed she could be. Her fingers touched the plastic, old, slightly yellowed, the paper inside still crisp despite 3 years of being carried everywhere she went. She broke the seal, unfolded the letter. The words were still there, still the same, still carrying weight that time hadn't diminished. The handwriting was shaky in places, written near the end when the cancer had stolen his strength, but not his determination to say what needed saying. Tessa, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I wish I could say I went peacefully, but we both know cancer doesn't grant that mercy. I hope you were there at the end. I hope I recognized you. The drugs made things fuzzy toward the finish. I know you promised your mother you'd never touch a rifle again after I'm gone. I was there when she asked. I heard what you said, and I understood why she needed that promise from you. Your mother blames the guns, blames the wars, blames the Marine Corps and every deployment that took me away from home. She's not wrong to be angry. The wars took pieces of me I'll never get back. The burn pits gave me this cancer. The violence changed something fundamental that I couldn't repair, no matter how hard I tried. But Tessa, listen to me carefully. I didn't teach you to kill. I taught you to protect. There's a difference, a critical one. Killers take life because they can, because they want to, because they're broken in ways that can't be fixed. Warriors take life because they must, because someone innocent needs protecting, because the alternative is worse. I taught you to be a warrior. The steadiest hands are the ones that know when not to pull the trigger, the ones that can hold a rifle and choose not to fire, the ones that understand that every round has consequences that echo forever. But when you must pull that trigger when someone's life depends on your willingness to cross that line, then you pull it without hesitation. Because hesitation gets good people killed. I've seen it happen. I've lived with those memories for 30 years. If the time comes when someone needs you, really needs you, don't let fear stop you. Don't let promises made in grief stop you. Don't let anything stop you from being who you were meant to be. You have a gift, Tessa, not just marksmanship, not just the ability to put rounds on target at distances that would make most shooters quit. You have the ability to stay calm when everything's chaos, to make hard decisions when there's no time for easy ones, to heal and fight with equal precision. I saw it when you were 13, the first time I took you to the range. The way you breathed through the fear instead of letting it control you. The way you listened and learned and adapted. I knew then that you were different, special in ways that had nothing to do with fatherly pride and everything to do with raw capability. I trained you because the world is dangerous, because good people need protecting, because I wanted you to have options when the moment came that required impossible choices. That moment will come, Tessa. Maybe not today, maybe not for years, but it will come. And when it does, you'll have to choose. Your mother wants you safe, wants you away from violence and guns and everything that reminds her of what the military took from us. That's her grief talking. That's her love trying to protect you from the pain she's endured. But I need you to know something she can't say right now. Safety isn't the absence of danger. It's the ability to respond when danger comes. And danger always comes. To someone, somewhere. Heal when you can, fight when you must. Always bring them home. That's what separates warriors from killers. Warriors bring people home. Warriors stand between danger and innocence. Warriors sacrifice sleep and peace and normalcy so others can have those things. If you choose to honor your promise to your mother, I'll understand. I'll be proud of you for keeping your word, for building a life away from violence, for finding peace I never could. But if you choose to break that promise, if you choose to be what I trained you to be, I'll be proud of that too. Maybe prouder. Because it means you understood what I was really teaching you all those years. Not how to kill, how to save. I love you, Tessa. I'm proud of you. I always have been. I always will be. No matter what choices you make, no matter where this life takes you, you have steady hands and a steady heart. Use them wisely. Use them well. Use them to make the world a little less dangerous for the people who can't protect themselves. That's all any of us can do. All my lust identify. P.S. The scope ring in this box is from my first confirmed save. Not kill, save. Somalia, 1993. Hostage situation. Bad angles. Worse lighting. I made the sheet and a 12-year-old girl went home to her family. I kept that scope ring to remind myself why I did this work. Why the nightmares were worth it. Why the cost was acceptable. Now it's yours. May it remind you of the same thing. Tessa's vision blurred, tears falling without permission, running down her face and dripping onto the letter. She tried to wipe them away before they could damage the ink. Failed. Let them fall. Outside, dawn was coming, the sky lightening from black to gray to the first hints of gold. In 4 hours, she'd prove herself again. Or fail completely. Either way, her father had already given her permission to choose. She folded the letter carefully, returned it to the plastic sleeve, placed it back in the box with the dog tags and photographs in the small brass scope ring that represented a life saved 23 years before she was born. The scope ring was tarnished, green with age, but the engraving on the inside was still legible. Somalia 93 brought her home. Her father's reminder, his anchor, his reason, now hers to carry forward. She closed the box, closed her eyes. And for the first time in 8 years, she felt something like peace. Not because the guilt was gone, not because the promise to her mother didn't matter, but because she finally understood what her father had been trying to tell her all along. The choice wasn't between healing and fighting, it was understanding when to do which, and having the courage to do both. When the alarm went off at 700, Tessa was already dressed, gear packed, ready. The range at 0800 was crowded beyond anything she'd expected. Word had spread, somehow, the way word always spread on military bases, through whispers and speculation and the irresistible human need to witness something extraordinary. The entire SEAL team was there, plus rangers from the joint training exercise, plus support personnel who'd heard rumors and couldn't resist seeing if they were true, plus officers she didn't recognize, observers from Norfolk, maybe higher. Tessa stood at the firing line with the M24 cradled in her arms, like a child she'd given up for adoption years ago and was now being forced to reclaim. Commander Hollis was setting up targets downrange, standard paper silhouettes at progressively insane distances, 600 meters, 900 meters, 1,200 meters. Distances where wind and elevation and the curvature of the earth became active participants in whether you hit or missed. Hollis walked back, stood next to Tessa, spoke quietly so only she could hear. 3 shots, 3 targets, progressive distance. You miss one, we're done. Understood. Yes, sir. This isn't about proving you got lucky last night. This is about proving you're the real thing, that your father trained you to a standard most people can't achieve in a lifetime of trying. Tessa nodded. Any questions? No, sir. Hollis stepped back, raised his voice so everyone could hear. Staff Sergeant Kane will engage 3 targets. Scoring will be pass-fail. Center mass hits only. Any questions from the shooter? Tessa shook her head. Range is hot. Commence firing. The world narrowed. Tessa dropped into position. Not prone this time. Standing. The hardest shooting position. No support except your own body. Every muscle tremor transmitted directly through the rifle into the bullet's trajectory. 600 meters. Through the scope, the target was small but distinct. Black silhouette against brown earth. She could feel her father standing behind her. Not literally, not some mystical presence, just the echo of 1,000 range sessions. his patient voice talking her through the fundamentals. Feet shoulder width, weight forward 40-60, support hand pulling back, shooting hand pushing forward. Create tension, become the bipod. The wind was steady, left to right, maybe 2 miles per hour. Elevation compensation minimal at this distance. She took one breath, let half of it out. Found the space between heartbeats. Fired. The rifle spoke, recoil hammering her already bruised shoulder. She absorbed it, stayed on target, watched the impact through the scope. Center mass. Behind her, someone whistled low. She transitioned to prone for the 900-meter target. Bipod deployed, more stable platform. But the distance was unforgiving. At this range, a 1 mile per hour wind error meant a complete miss. The wind was shifting, gusting, playing games with trajectories the way wind always did when you needed it to cooperate. She waited, not forcing it, not rushing, just waiting for the moment when atmospheric conditions aligned with mathematics and muscle memory. Her father had taught her patience on a sweltering afternoon when she'd been 15 and eager and convinced that speed mattered more than precision. The target will be there in 5 seconds or 5 minutes, he'd said. Your job isn't to be fast. It's to be certain. She'd argued, insisted that speed was necessary in combat, that hesitation got people killed. He'd looked at her with those patient eyes that had seen more combat than she could imagine. Hesitation kills, I agree, but there's a difference between hesitation and patience. Hesitation is fear. Patience is discipline. Learn the difference or you'll never be better than average. She'd learned. The wind settled for exactly 3 seconds. She fired. The target took the hit exactly where she'd aimed. The crowd was murmuring now. Low conversations. Disbelief competing with the evidence their own eyes were providing. Hollis stepped forward. Final target, 1,200 meters. Moving. Tessa's eyebrows rose slightly. This hadn't been part of the briefing. Downrange, someone started pulling the target on a lateral track. Slow but steady, adding complexity that transformed an already difficult shot into something approaching impossible for most military snipers. She could see the bruise on her shoulder without looking. Purple and yellow spreading like watercolor. Tender, every shot adding pain to pain. But pain was temporary. Failure was permanent. She found the target in her scope, tracked its movement, calculated lead time, wind drift, bullet drop that approached 30 feet at this distance, spin drift, temperature differential. Her father had made her practice this exact shot for 2 years before he'd been satisfied with her consistency. Moving targets at extreme distance. The kind of shooting that separated hobbyists from professionals. The kind that force recon snipers built careers on. The memory came unbidden. Age 17. State championship. Final shot. Moving target at 1,100 meters. Her father watching from the observation stand. She'd missed the first attempt. Wind call wrong by half a mile per hour. The kind of microscopic error that meant everything at that distance. Her father hadn't said a word. Just waited. She'd adjusted. Fired again. Hit. Won the championship. Afterward, he'd taken her for ice cream. Sat across from her in a booth at the diner they always went to after competitions. You know what I'm proud of, he'd asked. That I won, that you adjusted, that you didn't panic when you missed, that you trusted your training enough to make the correction and try again. He'd smiled. Winners aren't the ones who never miss. They're the ones who miss and still find a way to make the shot that matters. The target was moving right to left. Steady pace, predictable. But predictable didn't mean easy at this distance. Her breathing stopped. Heart rate dropped below 60 beats per minute. The space between heartbeats became infinite. She fired. 1,200 meters downrange, the target jerked, dead center. The kind of hit that looked like it had been painted on rather than achieved through ballistic calculation and absolute precision. Silence. Complete and absolute. Then Brennan whistled, long and low, the kind of sound that meant words had failed completely. Garrett was shaking his head slowly. That's not possible. Obviously it is, Thatcher said quietly. We just watched it happen. Tessa safed the rifle, stood. Her legs were unsteady, her shoulder was screaming, her hands were trembling with adrenaline dump, but she'd done it. Proven it wasn't luck. Proven she was exactly what her father had trained her to be. Hollis walked over. His face was carefully neutral, but his eyes were doing calculations that had nothing to do with ballistics and everything to do with operational capabilities. Your father, he said quietly. Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Kane, Force Recon. How many confirmed during his career? 53, sir. Operation Desert Storm, various classified operations in the following years. And he trained you to that standard. He tried, sir. I don't know if I reached it. Hollis did smile then, small but genuine. Staff Sergeant, you just made 3 shots that 99% of military snipers couldn't make on their best day with perfect conditions. I'd say you reached it. He turned to address the assembled crowd. What you just witnessed is classified. Nobody talks about this outside this range. Not to friends, not to family, not to anyone. This is need to know, and none of you need anyone else to know. Understood. A chorus of yes, sir rippled through the observers. Hollis looked back at Tessa. My office, 1 hour, bring your gear. He walked away. Tessa started breaking down the rifle, hands moving automatically through a task they'd performed thousands of times. Muscle memory handling the familiar choreography while her mind processed what had just happened. She'd proven herself. Completely. Irrevocably. There was no going back to invisible now. Lawson approached. The young SEAL she'd saved with her medical knowledge days ago and her marksmanship last night. His shoulder was bandaged, but his arm was working. Ma'am, he didn't salute. Too informal for that, but his tone carried the same respect. I wanted to thank you for last night. Garrett said I'd have bled out if you hadn't made that shot. You're welcome. Also wanted to apologize for the things I said, the things I thought. I was wrong about you. Tessa looked at him, 25 years old, his whole career ahead of him, still learning the difference between confidence and wisdom. You weren't wrong to be skeptical, she said. I didn't give you any reason to think I was anything other than what my paperwork claimed. You were being professional. That's exactly what you should have been. Still, I should have paid more attention, should have seen the signs. Paying attention is what keeps you alive, Lawson. You're learning that lesson now. Don't apologize for it. Just remember it. He nodded, started to leave, turned back. One question. Go ahead. Your father, when did he start teaching you? Tessa thought back. To a warm Saturday morning in rural North Carolina. To a man with patient hands and infinite time. To the moment everything changed. I was 12 years old. He'd just gotten back from a deployment he couldn't talk about. Came home different, quieter. Spent a lot of time in the garage just working on things that didn't need fixing. She paused, remembering. One morning he asked if I wanted to learn to shoot. I said yes. I didn't understand why until years later. Why, because he'd seen what happened when good people couldn't protect themselves or each other. He wanted to make sure I could do both. She met Lawson's eyes. He succeeded. Yeah, Lawson said quietly. He really did. 1 hour later, Tessa was standing in Hollis's office with her gear packed and her future uncertain. Hollis wasn't alone. 3 men in suits, federal agents, FBI probably. The kind of people who showed up when situations escalated beyond military jurisdiction. Staff Sergeant Kane, Hollis said, these gentlemen have a situation. I'll let them explain. The oldest agent stepped forward, 50-something, silver hair, the kind of face that had seen things and filed them away for later prosecution. Agent Morrison, FBI Critical Incident Response Group. We have a hostage situation developing in Raleigh, federal building, 18 civilians, 6 armed hostiles. They're demanding things we can't give them and making threats we have to take seriously. What does this have to do with me? Tessa asked. We need tactical support, military assets. Specifically, we need precision overwatch and someone with advanced medical capabilities. Commander Hollis suggested you might be uniquely qualified for both roles. The room went very quiet. Tessa looked at Hollis. He met her eyes, waiting for her decision, not pushing, not demanding, just presenting the option and letting her choose. This was real, not training, not a range exercise where misses meant starting over instead of lives ending. Real hostages, real terrorists, real bullets that would tear through human tissue with absolute indifference to whether those humans were innocent or guilty. If she said yes, she'd be breaking her promise to her mother completely and consciously. Not just one shot in an emergency, not just proving she could still do it, but actively choosing to become the weapon her father had forged, choosing to be the thing she'd spent 8 years running from. If she said no, 18 people might die, and she'd spend the rest of her life knowing she could have saved them but chose a promise over their lives. Her hand drifted to her chest, where the dog tags hung under her uniform. Her father's tags, the ones that had hung around his neck through 3 wars and a dozen conflicts that never made the news. The tags that reminded her what this was really about. Not glory, not proving herself, bringing people home. She looked at Morrison. What's the timeline? Wheels up in 15 minutes. 30-minute flight. We need to be in position before 1,000 hours. And you need both skill sets, medical and marksmanship. Yes, the situation is fluid. We don't know if we'll need a shooter, a medic, or both. Ideally, someone who can transition between roles as the situation evolves. Tessa looked down at her hands, scarred, calloused, steady. Her father's hands. The hands he'd trained to heal and kill with equal precision. Heal when you can, fight when you must. Always bring them home. She looked up. I'm in. The helicopter was loud and violent. The kind of machine that turned physics into forward momentum through sheer mechanical aggression. Tessa sat in the troop bay with her gear, medical kit secured to her left side, M24 rifle case secured to her right, two halves of the same person finally integrated into one operator. Brennan sat across from her. He'd been quiet since they loaded up, just watching her with an expression that looked like he was trying to reconcile two completely different people into one coherent identity. Finally, he spoke, had to shout over the rotors. I owe you an apology. You already apologized. Not good enough. I was a complete asshole, called you dead weight, made jokes, treated you like you didn't belong. He leaned forward. You saved Lawson's life, twice, once with medicine, once with shooting, and I was too busy being an idiot to see what you were. Tessa looked at him, really looked, saw past the swagger and bravado to the person underneath. Someone who took his job seriously, who protected his team, who'd made assumptions based on incomplete information and was man enough to admit when he was wrong. We're good, Brennan. We're not. Not until you know that I see you now. Really see you. You're not admin. You're not logistics. You're... He stopped, searching for the right word. Useful, Tessa offered. A goddamn warrior, he finished. He reached into his vest, pulled out something small, extended it toward her. A patch. SEAL team insignia. The trident. The kind you earned through blood and qualification. The kind you didn't just hand out to people who hadn't been through BUD/S. You're one of us, he said. Tessa took the patch, felt the weight of it, not the physical weight, the meaning, the acceptance from people who didn't accept easily. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just do what you do. Save lives. Take lives. Whatever the situation requires. He grinned. And maybe teach me how to shoot like that, because that moving target shot was pure magic. Tessa smiled, small, but genuine. For the first time in 8 years, she felt like she'd come home. The helicopter banked. Raleigh appeared below. City streets, buildings, midday traffic, and one federal structure with armed hostiles inside holding innocent people who'd just been trying to do their jobs when violence came calling. Garrett moved up beside her, handed her a radio earpiece. Channel 3, command frequency. You'll hear everything real time. Copy. Tessa. He waited until she looked at him. Whatever happens down there, whatever you have to do, we've got your back. All of us. She nodded, because words were inadequate for what he was offering. Trust, acceptance, brotherhood. The thing she'd given up when she'd made her promise. The thing she was reclaiming right now. The helicopter descended toward the staging area, toward 18 people who needed someone with steady hands and a steady heart, who knew when to heal and when to fight. And Tessa Kane was finally ready to be both. Not because she'd stopped caring about her promise, but because she finally understood what her father had been trying to tell her all along. Some promises are meant to be broken when keeping them costs more than breaking them. Some choices aren't between right and wrong. They're between who you were and who you need to be. And sometimes becoming who you need to be means honoring the person who made you that way, even if it means disappointing the person you made promises to. Her father had given her the tools. Her mother had given her the conscience. Now it was time to use both. The helicopter touched down, and Tessa stepped out into the sunlight, carrying everything she was and everything she'd ever been trained to be. Ready. The federal building rose 12 stories into Raleigh's morning sky. Glass and concrete. Modern architecture that was supposed to represent transparency and progress. Now it represented something else entirely. A cage holding 18 innocent people. Tessa was positioned on an adjacent rooftop, 6 stories up. Perfect sight lines into the target building's eastern exposure. The M24 rifle was already deployed. Bipod legs steady on concrete, scope ranging distances and calculating trajectories before she'd even been asked to fire. Below, SEAL team operators were moving into position. Quiet, professional, the kind of coordination that looked easy but required years of training to execute under stress. The radio in her ear crackled with traffic. Garrett coordinating medical staging. Hollis establishing command and control. FBI agents negotiating with hostiles who weren't interested in negotiation. Tessa's world had contracted to geometry and wind and the space between heartbeats. This was what her father had trained her for, not competition shooting, not range exercises, but this exact moment when lives hung in the balance and steady hands made the difference between tragedy and survival. She could feel him watching, not literally, not some mystical presence, just the weight of his training, his patience, his absolute certainty that she could do this when it mattered most. The IED detonated without warning. 1 second, the world was controlled chaos. Plans being executed, operators moving with purpose. The next second, everything was fire and pressure, and the laws of physics asserting themselves with brutal indifference. The blast wave hit Tessa like a physical thing, not sound, not heat, pure kinetic energy that picked her up and threw her backward like she weighed nothing at all. She had time to think one coherent thought: this is gonna hurt. Then she was falling. 12 feet doesn't sound like much, not when you're standing on solid ground looking up. But when you're airborne and accelerating, and the landing zone is a pile of construction debris and broken concrete, 12 feet becomes the distance between walking away and never walking again. Tessa hit hard. The impact drove air from her lungs in a single violent exhalation. Stars exploded behind her eyes. The world tilted and spun and refused to settle into anything approaching stable. Pain came next. Her left leg. Something wrong. Something very wrong. Not broken exactly, but torn. Shrapnel. She could feel it. Jagged metal embedded in muscle tissue. Blood already soaking through her pants. Warm and wet and spreading. Her right arm had taken the brunt of the landing. Fractured. Maybe worse. She tried to move it, and white-hot agony shot from shoulder to fingertips. The rifle was gone, thrown somewhere in the chaos. 20 feet away, might as well have been 20 miles. She tried to sit up, failed. Tried to assess her injuries systematically. Failed at that too. Shock was trying to pull her under. The body's natural response to trauma: shut down non-essential systems, conserve resources, survive. But survival required consciousness, required her to fight through the pain and the shock and the absolute certainty that she was done. Finished. Out of the fight, the radio in her ear was screaming. Multiple voices, overlapping, urgent. Team pinned, multiple hostiles building east side. RPG launch, take cover. Man down, grid November 7-4. Tessa's eyes found focus. Not much, just enough. The world was still spinning, but slower now, more controlled. Her training kicked in. Assessment. Always start with assessment. Airway clear. Breathing compromised but functional. Circulation problematic. Blood loss from the leg. Significant but not immediately catastrophic. Arterial number. Venous. She had time. Not much, but some. Boots pounding toward her position. Garrett. The medic dropped to his knees beside her. His face was smudged with cordite and dust. His hands were already moving, checking for injuries, prioritizing threats. The same systematic approach she'd watched him use on Lawson days ago. Tessa, don't move. She hadn't planned on moving. Moving hurt. Moving was for people whose bodies still followed orders. Stay still, Garrett said. His knife was already cutting through her left pant leg, exposing the damage. You're losing blood fast. Tessa forced her breathing to slow. In through the nose. 4 counts. The technique was harder now. Broken ribs maybe, or bruised. Hard to tell. Everything hurt. Garrett sucked in a breath when he saw her leg. That wasn't good. Combat medics didn't react to injuries. They treated them. If he was reacting, that meant the damage was worse than standard bad. Shrapnel, he muttered. Deep. Multiple fragments. Gonna need a tourniquet. Garrett, her voice cut through his assessment. Quiet, but carrying the weight that had nothing to do with volume. He looked at her face. Blood was running into her left eye from a scalp laceration she hadn't noticed yet. Her right arm was bent at an angle that suggested bones had stopped being friends. But her eyes were tracking, analyzing, reading information from a battlefield she couldn't see but could hear and feel and interpret. Suppressive fire dropped on the left flank, she said. Each word was expensive, purchased with pain and willpower. They're repositioning an RPG. You have 8 seconds. Garrett blinked. What? 7 seconds? He stared at her like she'd started speaking in tongues. Around them, the gunfire continued. Men shouting, radio traffic screaming, the world ending in installments. Tessa, you're in shock. You can't possibly... The rocket-propelled grenade hit exactly where she predicted. 40 meters north, the wall disintegrated, shrapnel and pulverized concrete raining down like lethal hail. Garrett's helmet took a hit. His head snapped sideways. He froze, hands still gripping the tourniquet he'd been about to apply, staring at her with an expression that transcended shock and landed somewhere in the territory of religious experience. Tessa hadn't moved, couldn't move, but her eyes were still tracking, still reading the battlefield through sound and experience and pattern recognition that operated below conscious thought. Secondary shooter, she said. Quieter now. Blood loss making her voice thin. Ridgeline, 11 o'clock, 400 meters. He's targeting Lawson. Garrett's hands had stopped working entirely. He was looking at her the way people looked at things that shouldn't exist but clearly did. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. The question came out rough, disbelieving, but genuine. Have you been combat trained? The words hung between them, heavy with implications, with the collapse of cover stories and the revelation of truths that couldn't be unsaid. Tessa met his eyes, behind the pain, behind the shock. Behind everything that was screaming at her to give up and let unconsciousness take her, there was something else. Clarity. Yes, she said, formally, long time ago. Garrett's expression shifted, understanding replacing disbelief, questions accumulating faster than he could ask them. But questions would have to wait. Movement. 40 feet to their right. Hostile advancing on their position, using the chaos as cover. Moving with purpose that suggested training and intent. He was coming for them. Garrett. Tessa's voice was urgent now, commanding despite the blood loss. My sidearm, left holster. He looked down, saw the Sig Sauer P226 secured there. Looked back at her face. You can't. Now, Cyan, the single word carried weight that left no room for argument. Garrett pulled the weapon, handed it over, watched as she transferred it to her left hand. Her right arm was useless, fractured or dislocated or both, but her left hand knew what to do. The hostile was 30 feet away, 25, 20. Tessa was lying on her back, one leg destroyed, one arm shattered, blood soaking into Raleigh concrete, but her left hand was steady. The fundamentals her father had drilled into her until they became reflex. Sight alignment, sight picture, trigger press, follow through. She fired, 50 yards, lying down, one-handed, injured, in shock. The hostile took the round center mass, dropped like someone had cut his power cord. Garrett's medical assessment stopped completely. He was staring at her with an expression that suggested his understanding of reality had just been fundamentally revised. Jesus Christ. The radio crackled. Hollis. Urgent. Brennan's hit need medical grid Charlie 9. Garrett's head snapped toward the transmission. Then back to Tessa, torn between two casualties who both needed immediate care. I have to go, he said. Go. You need, I'll manage. Go. He left emergency supplies, combat gauze, pressure bandages, a second tourniquet, everything she'd need to keep herself alive if she had the strength to use it. Then he was sprinting away. And Tessa was alone. Brennan was 80 yards distant, might as well have been miles. The space between here and there was urban terrain, broken concrete, debris piles, zero cover, all of it under direct observation from hostiles who'd already proven they could hit what they aimed at. Crossing that space was suicide. Staying here while Brennan bled out wasn't an option either. Tessa tried to stand, made it approximately 6 inches off the ground before her left leg informed her that standing was absolutely not happening. Not now, not soon, possibly not ever again. Fine. She didn't need to stand. She needed to move. The drag started badly and got worse. Using her left arm, her right was useless. Pulling herself forward, concrete abrading skin. Blood making the surface slippery. Her injured leg trailing behind like dead weight that used to be part of her body. 10 yards felt like 100. 20 yards felt like she'd crossed a continent. The pain was constant now. Not sharp anymore. Just a dull roar that lived in every nerve ending, demanding attention she couldn't afford to give it. Her father's voice in her head, not memory, not imagination. Just the lesson he'd beaten into her over 10,000 repetitions. When someone needs you, you go. Pain is temporary. Failure is permanent. You go. 30 yards. Her left arm was shaking, muscles exhausted beyond any fatigue she'd experienced. But she kept moving. Because stopping meant Brennan died. And Brennan dying meant she'd failed. And failure wasn't acceptable. 40 yards. The hostile fire had intensified, rounds cracking past, close enough to hear the supersonic snap. close enough that luck was the only thing keeping her alive. 50 yards. She could see Brennan now, lying behind a concrete barrier. His left shoulder was dark with blood. Too much blood. Arterial bleed. She could see the pulsing even from here. See his life pumping out onto North Carolina asphalt in rhythmic spurts. 60 yards. Her vision was narrowing. Tunnel vision. Blood loss catching up. The body shutting down non-essential systems. Soon her brain would be considered non-essential. Then everything would stop. 70 yards. Almost there. Almost. Just a little further. Just keep moving. 80 yards. She reached him. Collapsed next to him. Didn't have strength left to control the fall. Brennan's eyes were glazed. Shock. Blood loss. He was looking at her, but not seeing. Somewhere else already. Somewhere between here and gone. "I've got you," she whispered. Her left hand found his shoulder. Found the wound. Arterial bleed. Just like she'd thought. Subclavian artery. One of the worst places to take damage. Hard to reach. Harder to control. Minutes from fatal if not treated immediately. She pulled combat gauze from the supplies Garrett had left, packed it into the wound. Not gentle. There was no time for gentle. Just pressure and compression and the desperate hope that clotting factors would activate before he bled out completely. Brennan's eyes found focus. Found her face. "I'm sorry," he mumbled. Delirious. "I was wrong about you. Shut up and keep pressure here." She guided his right hand to the wound, made him apply pressure while she worked. Wrapping, securing, building layers of protection between his damaged artery and complete exsanguination. The gauze was already soaking through, red spreading across white, but slower now, more controlled. She'd bought him time, not much, but some. Movement in her peripheral vision. Hostile. 15 feet away, rifle raised, drawing down on both of them. Tessa had no weapon, no way to defend. Nothing but her body between Brennan and the shooter. The hostile's rifle jammed. Malfunction, misfire. The kind of mechanical failure that happens sometimes when weapons got dirty and stressed and asked to perform beyond their maintenance schedule. He transitioned to knife. Charged. Tessa rolled, grabbed Brennan's combat knife from his vest. 7 inches of carbon steel. Sharp enough to split molecules. Heavy enough to punch through bone if you knew where to hit. The hostile was bigger, stronger, uninjured. But Tessa had been training for this since she was 16 years old. Not sport fighting, not controlled sparring, real combat. The kind her father had learned in places that didn't make the news and taught her in barns where mistakes meant bruises instead of death. He came in high, overhand strike, predictable. The kind of attack that worked on people who didn't know better. She went low. Under his reach, knife hand driving up. Not into his stomach, too much muscle, too much protection. Into his throat, where arteries lived close to the surface and protection was measured in millimeters. The blade found tissue, found blood, found the places that turned human beings into past tense. He dropped. She dropped too. No strength left, nothing in reserve. Running on fumes and willpower and the absolute requirement to keep Brennan alive long enough for Garrett to return. She was shaking, covered in mud and blood and fluids that belonged inside bodies. Her hands looked like they belonged to someone else. Someone who did terrible things in service of necessary outcomes. This was what her father had trained her to be. Not a killer, a protector. Someone who could cross the line between healing and violence when the situation demanded it. Someone who understood that both were tools. Neither was identity. Both were available when needed. Boots approaching. Fast. She tried to raise the knife. Couldn't. Her body had nothing left to give. "Tessa," Garrett's voice. He stopped, stared, at her, at Brennan, at the dead hostile, at the scene that told a story his mind couldn't quite process. "Both hands," he whispered. Not to her, to himself. "You do everything with both hands." Tessa tried to respond. Couldn't. The world was going gray around the edges, consciousness becoming negotiable. "Get Brennan out." Then everything went black. The hospital ceiling was white, aggressively white. The kind of sterile absence of color that suggested medical facilities and fluorescent lighting and the aftermath of violence. Tessa's eyes opened slowly. Everything hurt, but it was manageable hurt, controlled, the kind that came with morphine and proper medical intervention and time. Her left leg was elevated, bandaged, surgical incisions visible beneath gauze. They'd removed the shrapnel, repaired the damage. Put her back together with sutures and staples and the quiet competence of trauma surgeons who saw these injuries daily. Her right arm was casted, immobilized. Fracture confirmed, but clean, repairable, nothing that wouldn't heal given time and proper care. The door opened. The entire SEAL team filed in, all of them, even Lawson, who was supposed to be on medical restriction. They filled the small hospital room. Standing, waiting. Brennan stepped forward. His left shoulder was bandaged, his arm in a sling, but he was alive, standing, functional, because of her. "I owe you my life," he said. His voice was rough, emotional in ways that didn't come naturally to men who built careers on controlled violence. "And an apology. I was an asshole. Called you dead weight. Treated you like you didn't matter." He paused. "You saved my life. Crawled 80 yards with a destroyed leg to pack my bleeding. Then killed a man to protect me, all while you were dying yourself." "You were protecting your team," Tessa said. Her voice was hoarse, damaged from smoke inhalation she didn't remember. "That's your job." "No," Brennan shook his head. "You protected us. You're the best of us." The door opened again. Commander Hollis entered, followed by officers Tessa didn't recognize. Brass, the kind who made decisions that affected careers and policies in the future direction of special operations. Hollis stood at attention. Staff Sergeant Tessa Kane, by order of Naval Special Warfare Command, dual designation combat medical specialist and designated marksman, effective immediately upon medical clearance. The room went silent. Tessa's eyes filled. She couldn't help it, couldn't stop it. 8 years of hiding, of pretending to be less than she was, of honoring a promise that had cost her the identity her father had given her. All of it ending in this moment. All of it validated by people who understood what it meant. The SEAL team came to attention, as one, synchronized, then rendered salutes that weren't required by regulation, but were absolutely required by respect. Tessa couldn't return the salute. Her right arm was casted, her left was connected to IV lines. But she nodded. That was enough. One by one they filed out. Back to duties, back to missions, back to the endless work of being ready for moments that might never come, but had to be prepared for anyway. Garrett stayed. Alone with her, he pulled up a chair, sat, looked at her face without the professional detachment of medic assessing patient, just human to human, person to person. "Your father taught you all of this. Everything important," Tessa said. "How to shoot, how to heal, when to do which." He'd be incredibly proud. The words hit harder than the IED blast. "I broke my promise to my mother." Garrett leaned forward. "You kept a sacred promise to yourself and to us. You brought us home. All of us. That's what warriors do." He stood, paused at the door. "Welcome to the team, Tessa, the real team." Then he was gone. And Tessa was alone with the ceiling and the pain and the absolute certainty that she'd made the right choice, even if it cost her everything, especially if it cost her everything. 6 months disappeared like water through open hands. The training facility at Camp Lejeune looked the same as it had when Tessa first arrived. Same buildings, same ranges. Same humid North Carolina air that made sweat inevitable. But everything else had changed. Tessa stood in front of 22 students. Mix of genders, mix of backgrounds, all of them there because someone had decided that integration was better than specialization, that the future of combat medicine required people who could fight and heal with equal proficiency. "Your weapon is whatever the moment requires," she said. Her voice carried across the classroom without effort. Projection learned from her father. From years of instruction before instruction became her mission. Scalpel or rifle, tourniquet or trigger. You don't choose based on preference. You choose based on what will save the most lives. She walked between the desks. Her left leg still carried a slight limp, permanent damage from shrapnel that had cut deep, but functional, mobile, better than the alternative. "Heal when you can, fight when you must." She paused. Let the words sink in. "But always, always bring them home alive." The students were practicing on training dummies, applying pressure bandages while maintaining weapons awareness, treating casualties while scanning for threats. The integration her father had taught her. The integration she'd proven worked when lives were actually at stake. Lawson was assisting, teaching the younger students, passing forward the lessons he'd learned when Tessa had saved his life twice in the same week. "She saved my life," he told them. "Now we save others. That's how this works. That's how the mission continues." After class, Tessa ran PT with the SEAL team. 5 miles, her leg ached by mile 3. But she finished. Because finishing was mandatory. Because showing weakness meant losing respect she'd bled to earn. Brennan jogged beside her. His shoulder had healed. Full range of motion. No permanent damage. Bet I can beat you to the finish, he said. Tessa glanced at him. With that torn meniscus dream on, he laughed, genuine, the kind of sound that came from brotherhood rather than hierarchy. They finished together, fist bump, mutual respect between people who'd seen each other at their worst and knew there was nothing left to prove. The ripple effects spread. Pentagon briefings adopted the Kane Protocol as standard for JSOC units. Integrated combat specialists, cross-trained, multi-capable. The future of special operations built on lessons learned from a woman who'd been dismissed as administrative support. News outlets picked up the story. Sanitized version. No names, no specifics, just the concept. Dual-role specialists saving lives others couldn't. A letter arrived from the Secretary of Defense. Commendation. Recognition. The kind of attention Tessa didn't want but accepted because refusing it would disrespect everyone who'd fought to make integration possible. She taught the first all-female integrated combat medical class. 6 students, all volunteers, all determined to prove that capability had nothing to do with gender and everything to do with training and willpower and the absolute refusal to quit when things got hard. The drive to her mother's house took 3 hours. Rural North Carolina. Roads that turned from highway to county, route to gravel, trees pressing close. The landscape of her childhood. Eleanor Kane's house was exactly as Tessa remembered. Small, well-maintained. The kind of home that represented stability and permanence in a world that seemed increasingly chaotic. Her mother opened the door before Tessa could knock. They sat at the kitchen table, coffee between them. Years of complicated history creating weight that made casual conversation impossible. I saw the awards ceremony on TV, Eleanor said finally. Your father. Mom, I know you didn't want, Eleanor interrupted, tears in her eyes. I was wrong. Tessa stopped, stared. I was angry, Eleanor continued, at war, at loss, at everything that took your father from me, piece by piece until cancer took what was left. She reached across the table, took Tessa's hand. But you don't destroy, you protect. She slid a newspaper across the table. Local paper. Headline, Local Hero Saves 14 Lives. Marcus taught you to be a guardian, Eleanor said. I finally understand that. He wasn't training you to kill. He was training you to prevent killing, to be the person who stands between danger and innocent people. She stood, pulled Tessa into a hug that carried 8 years of distance and grief and reconciliation. He'd be so proud, Eleanor whispered. I'm proud. I love you, Mom. I love you too, baby. The office at Camp Lejeune was small but functional. Desk, chair, maps on the walls showing terrain and targets and the endless geography of necessary violence. Tessa sat reviewing mission briefings, high-risk humanitarian extraction, hostile territory, American aid workers trapped, time-sensitive, complex. Thatcher entered without knocking, dropped a folder on her desk. New assignment, we deploy at 0500 tomorrow. Tessa touched the dog tags around her neck. Her father's, worn smooth by years of combat and concern, now hers to carry forward. What do we need? Medical and Overwatch. Simultaneous. You're the only operator we have who can do both at the level this requires. She opened the folder, studied the details, the risks, the probabilities, the math of violence and mercy. When do we brief? 2 hours. She looked at her uniform hanging on the door. 2 patches visible, caduceus for medical, crosshairs for marksmanship, both sides of the same mission, both parts of who she was. I'm ready. Thatcher paused at the door. Your father would be proud of who you became. I became who he trained me to be. No, I don't. Thatcher shook his head. You became more. He gave you tools. You built something better. Then he was gone. Tessa stood, walked to the window. Outside, the team was loading gear, preparing. The endless cycle of readiness and deployment and return, her father's voice in her memory, not imagination. Just lessons so deeply embedded, they'd become part of her internal dialogue. The steadiest hands are the ones that know when not to pull the trigger. But when you must pull it, never hesitate, because hesitation gets good people killed. She looked at her hands, scarred from training, calloused from use, steady despite everything they'd done and seen and been required to accomplish. Both hands, one that healed, one that fought, actually the same hands, doing what the moment required. Nothing more, nothing less. She grabbed her medical kit, her rifle case, the tools of integration, The proof that specialization was limitation and versatility was survival. The helicopter was waiting. The mission was waiting. People who needed someone with steady hands and a steady heart were waiting. And Tessa Kane was done waiting. She was done hiding. She was done pretending to be less than she was. She was exactly what her father had trained her to be. A warrior who brought people home. Always, no matter the cost. The helicopter lifted off into Carolina morning, banking toward wherever the mission required, toward danger and duty and the absolute certainty that when she arrived, she'd be exactly what was needed. Both hands ready, both skills available. One person integrated into something greater than the sum of her parts. The kind of operator her father had always known she could be. The kind of operator the world needed. The kind of operator she'd finally allowed herself to become. The steady hands that knew exactly when to heal and exactly when to fight.